Hello, I'm Felicia Jackson.
And I am Giulia Bottaro.
Welcome to Shake and Not Burn. Every day we're bombarded with headlines of crisis and disruption, from climate shocks to inequality to AI upheaval.
But behind the noise are choices, patterns, and opportunities. What we need is sustainability literacy, the clarity and confidence to interpret complexity, see trade-offs, and make decisions.
Our podcast goes beyond the headlines to uncover how real people are tackling change and what we can learn from them.
You can use these ideas to stay steady, even unshakable, in a world that feels uncertain.
This is Shaken Not Burned. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Shaken Not Burned, the podcast where we shake up sustainability conversations without burning out. Today we're diving into one of the most urgent but misunderstood issues in environmental health. That's PFAS, or what we call forever chemicals. These are synthetic compounds and they're in everything from cookware to firefighting foam, and they don't break down. They accumulate in our water, our soil, and even our bodies. So that increases the risk from cancer, immune disorders, and all sorts of things. Much of the attention about PFAS has actually been on clearing them out of the water system. But our guest today is arguing that we should be going further upstream, tackling PFAS at the factory level before they ever get out into the air or the water. Anoosheh Oskouian, Chief Executive of Ship and Shore Environmental, joins us today to unpack what PFAS are, why they matter, and how new technologies could change the game. This episode is about more than chemicals. It's about how prevention, innovation, and smart policy can come together to protect communities and to build resilience. We know that PFAS are called forever chemicals. Why, Anoosheh, have they become such a flashpoint in the environmental debate?
Hello, and thank you for having me on board with you. It is very nice to finally pay attention to these forever chemicals, which are vital to making a lot of products, from clothing that now have been modified to be rainproof, for Teflon, dishware, and cookware that people use. And at one point in time, the forever chemicals became the key to many of the plastic products as a whole that we have. And it was developed in the 1940s. There were a lot of the entities from the governmental side were involved with development, and it was all due to the fact that they wanted to make sure things lasted through various processes. That's why they really are forever chemical, because they really last for a long time.
Right.
However, you have to capture what is coming off of your manufacturing facilities.
So this is that we discovered that PFAS are in pretty much everything that we manufacture for the modern world, and they were used because they were invented as a way of making things more robust long before we actually understood the implications of their use.
Absolutely. We are a creative, innovative society that are continuously thinking about how else can we create something and what else can we do. This is a personal opinion, nothing factual, but we never think of the aftermath.
Yeah, the consequences.
No one ever thinks of the consequences.
One of the things about sustainability is actually trying to look at the impacts of our choices on the world around us and look at what's actually going on. Because as far as I understand, we know they're persistent. That's why they're called forever. But I understand they've been found in about 45% of US tap water. Is that right?
It is correct. And there are studies and reports that are coming out all the time. Number of the items that I will be referring to are the EPA publications and studies that really took this particular issue we have at hand to the higher levels to make sure that there are preventive measures that are being put in place. There are solutions that are being put in place for the water system, which has to eventually collect all of the material if we can collect it efficiently enough. And for all the producers of the chemical, whichever format they may be, to capture it at the source as it comes out of the manufacturing facility. Right now we're working with two major producers in the nation, and we have done enough work to realize now that we have captured it, what do we do and how do we get rid of it for good?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting point here about the role of regulation, which is, while it's often seen as sort of overreach and an imposition of rules and regulations, if it stops dangerous chemicals in the water, it's not necessarily a bad idea. Can I ask you first, how did you come into the world of PFAs? Where did you first come across them?
Our company out of California was established 25 years ago. I'm a founder of the company, and my background is chemical engineering, and I eventually switched over to environmental work, which I found it to be much more rewarding. And one of the areas that we came across years ago were any fluorinated material, anything that would have HF in it, it's very difficult to destruct without having aftermaths. And whenever we had to build equipment, what we do is we do design, engineering, and manufacturing equipment all in our facility to get rid of any pollutants, any VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And along with the VOCs, we have a lot of other elements that every now and then we get into: chlorinated material, fluorinated material. Even at times, some processes had cyanide due to the fact that it is used.
So these are all offshoots of your destruction process or offshoots of the PFAs?
These are all offshoots of what is being produced, and what we do is we take what we can and collect most often 100% of any of the airstream or processes from manufacturing facilities. I always say out of the stacks or the chimneys where everything used to be sent out to the atmosphere, but no longer. But once we collected, the area I became very involved with and interested in is, how do we get rid of it? How do we destruct it? Now that we know it is there, now that we have collected it, our systems had to be built robust to be able to handle the fluorinated material. That is one of the key elements. Our systems are what is referred to in the olden days incinerators. Now they're called oxidizers.
Right.
But this particular element has to go through a process of minimum 1850 Fahrenheit, 2000 degrees.
Okay.
In order for it to break down properly.
So just to explain to the readers, this is basically saying that it used to be called incineration because you're burning it, but actually what you're doing is supplying huge amounts of heat in order to break down the chemical bonds and turn them into something less harmful.
That is right.
Okay.
And then after it comes out of the system that we have developed, which is called a direct fire thermal oxidizer, it goes through a scrubbing phase, which will then turn the aftermath of some of the acids that are created and neutralize it. And another step after that, and by the time we're done with the whole process, there is nothing harmful that is coming out to the atmosphere, to the facility, to the location where they are being processed.
Okay. So can you talk me through what this looks like in practice? So you talk about the idea that what your company does is stop PFAs at the factory gate. What does that look like for a company? What do they have to do? How does it work?
I can go through it technically. What happens is right now we are working on a major project for a company that produces it because they are the largest producer of this particular chemical. Clients are aerospace, their clients are military, their clients are people that are not necessarily able to produce their own without having this chemical in there.
Right.
And I wanted to take us back for just 1 minute. I was involved with American Chemistry Council for a number of years, just because of wanting to know and learn and provide technology. And the reason they called it forever chemicals because they could not possibly find anything else to replace it with. Therefore,
I thought it was a forever chemical because it stayed in the environment.
no, because it lasts, believe it or not, even our biomedical industry that are now beginning to make a lot of the um, artificial medical devices at a very, very small sizes are used in order for it to go into our body and not harm anything else around. So it
Okay.
has a lot of good use as well. You can't just get rid of it.
If you want to still be able to use the thing that you need to create these micro-medical devices or fuels
Right,
or whatever it is that a sector requires, we've got to
right.
find a new way of treating the environmental consequences.
That's right. So that is the level we come in at. So for the companies that are producing the chemicals now have been enforced to make sure any of the emissions and potential pollutants regarding this chemical does not get it to the atmosphere.
Right.
And we capture it from the inception of the product being produced. So that is one of the areas where if you can just treat it from the root and prevent it from getting to the atmosphere and
So,
to our environment.
so does that mean that you then help redesign the processes of a business's manufacturing so that it
That's
doesn't get out there into the world?
that's right. That's what we do. So
Okay.
that had been I don't want to say it ignored, but we just have to adhere by the rules and regulations with respect to how do we manufacture things. I just say one totally different industry. For example, solar panels are just amazing. Our producing power. People are just so obsessed with making sure that we have enough energy produced. However, in the process of making these solar panels and the films, and they also have very small amount of this chemicals going into the process as well.
Sorry, which chemical is this?
Fluorinated, some of the fluorinated
Okay.
material, right? But at a extremely small ppb, parts per billion level.
Okay.
So solar panel manufacturers, as great as their product is, they have to make sure they take care of their emission with all of these plants that are being built here in US now.
Of course.
So if we capture the emissions, at least the plant itself is environmentally sustainable and is not producing emissions and harmful VOCs and emissions while you're making a great product. That is what we try to do.
That's a really important part of the conversation that I think sometimes gets missed because we're so obsessed about the conversation about carbon emissions that we forget there's lots of other emissions and side effects and consequences of modern manufacturing. And that, they all have to be dealt with, whatever actually it might be. It's a fascinating point.
That's right. And if I may add, everybody becomes obsessed with carbon emission, but carbon doesn't exist on its own.
Yeah.
It is usually part of the chain of some of these other formulas that we're talking about, and is actually produced in nature as well. But we just have to make sure we innovate, create, produce environmentally conscious products.
That certainly is one of the goals we're working towards. One of my questions for you, because I'm fascinated by this idea of design engineering, whatever it might be, whether it's in policy or cities or economics, but certainly in looking at new ways of addressing manufacturing. What is unique about designing for the destruction of PFAS? What's different about it?
Well, one of the areas that we encountered, I've been following PFAS for a long time, just from a personal and business side, and practices that I can follow through to make sure that I'm not exposed to it as much as.
Right.
But what has happened is a number of people and some of these companies thought that they were treating the emissions. However, the systems that they put in place was easily and quickly eaten up by the attack of the fluorinated materials, and the systems did not last long enough. So, and we were very involved with designing and looking at this from the point of view that it has to be destructed at extremely high temperatures. So the metal that you use has to be looked at. So it's not the same as some of the regular thermal oxidizers. All of our systems are lined, or the insulation on the inside has to be of a special material due to the temperatures that they're used for various processes. Right. But beside that, but some of these material that were used for regular insulation were no longer withstanding to the temperatures or the fumes as they were being destructed. So a proper design as to how do we get rid of the PFAS that comes through the process had to be looked at. And when you're pulling in a stream of air, your fan, the blowers that is pulling it in, has to be of a special material. Therefore, it forced the industry to become creative as well, to come up with products that are used in our industry that can withstand it and destruct it properly.
It's a fascinating idea because, again, I don't think a lot of people think on the everyday about the process of testing materials, identifying what works, and then putting them together into a system that's both robust and enduring.
Absolutely. And many just try to apply what is available without thinking it through. And it's just the wrong fit for the application.
Right.
Which is why it took us a while to develop a proper system that could go through the testing as well as through the process to be able to do this. And now we're doing some retrofits and providing them with another backup system. One of our clients is getting 2 of the systems at the same time to make sure that they are never down.
Right.
Because if they are, especially in some of the areas and states in US, you are not able to continue operation unless you're in full compliance with the air quality.
Which, to be fair, does make sense when you consider the damage that it actually does.
That's
one of the things I'd be really interested in, because you have to admit, I really don't know that much about the PFAS market. Where does your company sit within the solutions landscape? Because this is part of the process whenever you're dealing with a problem. How do you decide whether to deal with prevention in the first place and not using it at all, or cleanup? And is there a difference in the international markets versus the US markets?
I have always been a big proponent of prevention and designing properly with the mindset of how do we design and address a problem that a manufacturing may create, even though they are providing amazing products. Oftentimes, people look at this, well, these are just rules and regulations that are coming down on us and is not necessary, or they do not want to bear the cost of the prevention because they're so focused on their own processes. So my advice to everyone has always been, you can have a brand new manufacturing facility, but have the environmental plan just as a part of the overall, and make sure that you're addressing everything that you may be producing that should not get to the atmosphere.
Right. So you integrate it into the building plans in the first place?
From the beginning, if we can. Okay. And some of the ones that are existing and have been existing for a long time, we go back in and retrofit it and try to provide systems that goes into it. New Jersey area, where they had a lot of chemical plants that were just sending all the wastewater down to the water lines, and nothing was being captured, and they really realized what a polluted area we have. Then a lot of enforcement of not only addressing the wastewater going to your natural drainage, if there may be, or even just dumping it in the ocean just because you've got a nice waterway. We had the same situation with a lot of them getting into the LA basin and polluting the water. But the PFAS we're referring to in the water system and getting into the water table and getting into the wastewater is at a much more difficult level for collection. And I believe that comes from, you know, washing your clothes that are all microfibers now. The clothes that are microfibers at a very, very, very small levels are being washed out as well. So what do? Get rid of all the clothes that have been created for the last 10, 15 years. All of our sports wear is created with it.
That's kind of terrifying, though, that actually an entirely new industry or new style became popular, was created and sent all around the world. It's everywhere. And yet it basically releases toxic chemicals into the water table.
It releases it at a very, very, very small levels, but over time it accumulates. And that's exactly what has been the case. Even though some of the products that have been produced using this chemical, as I said, with the aerospace and some of the planes have a number of components in there that you naturally want to have it of something extremely durable. So you never want to put that safety at question. But some of the other ones, maybe as people are washing their clothes with all of this, the water should be cleaned up before it goes out.
Obviously, you're talking about your intervention as prevention and sort of helping companies design things in a way that it's taken out at source. Is there a market for cleaning it up, or is it too difficult to clean it up because it's in the water table and that doesn't really exist? I'm just trying to get a picture of the size of the market and how much the impact is.
There's always a market for cleaning up. I like to use this example as what we refer to climate change. We don't call it global warming because people then they thought, oh, it's not getting warm here, it's getting cold. It's climate change. If people like to ignore it and say it doesn't exist, then that's their problem. But it does exist. So are we just going to throw our arms up in the air and say, well, there's nothing we could do about it, let it just go on? We have come up with a lot of measures, and some more expensive than none, but there are solutions.
Yeah.
And we try to shy away from things that may become so massive that we don't even want to think about the cost and the how. But there's always a way to do it. Right now, if our water levels and everything that has gone to the water level, they can easily be remediated. They can easily be cleaned up. And this is extreme, but I think maybe in a few years will come. As people are doing their wash and laundry and all of that at the house, they were mentioning that some of that water should go through a filtration before it's just disposed to the wastewater systems.
You know, who are the clients now, and who might they be in the future? Where's the adoption curve? Where is it actually going to be? So you're working with utilities and manufacturers and municipalities, right?
We are working with a lot of manufacturers that produce the chemicals. We also have a few systems that are under design to be given to some of the municipalities that have to get rid of this in their overall plans. However, a lot of the industries, like the biomedical industries, I don't think they're quite switching over yet, because you definitely don't want to risk it.
Trying something new and it doesn't work.
Absolutely. But first of all, the key point is the awareness and talking enough about it, because at one point in time, people didn't even know what PFAS was. And there are two different kinds. There's PFAS and PFOS that has some of the sulfates. We won't get into the chemical side. But awareness is the key. Talking about it, at least bringing it up to everyone's attention. This is very similar to climate change, as I say. A number of people were talking about climate change for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And now eventually is becoming an issue that when your practices in becoming an industrial society has an aftermath. So
Yeah.
you have to really think it through. That's basically what it is. Another thing that I have, it has nothing to do with PFAS just yet, is all of the solar panels and all of the batteries we're producing in our cars, and everybody just, I drive an electric car as well. What are we going to do with it when we have to get rid of all these
Yeah.
batteries? We definitely don't want them in our landfills. And those batteries, as soon as they're recycled, something has to happen to all the chemicals that are
Yeah.
inside the battery.
That's one
Yep.
of the really big debates about how you actually make batteries work at a grand scale. Do you recycle them? Do you reuse them? Do you restructure them? Again, that's one of the things we always have to remember when we're in that process of being creative and inventing, is to think about consequences. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but there's a famous American scientist who invented one of the gases that's in, is it refrigeration? And then was also the person who added
That's right.
lead to gasoline, and two of the
That's
most
right.
damaging things you can do, but absolutely
That's
brilliant at
right.
the time.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. The refrigeration, one of the first traces of this whole thing came about when they were getting rid of the gases that was in the refrigeration.
Right.
When they were destructing it, or they were just crushing it, then they found out that there a lot of this is being released. What do
Right.
we do with it? The same way with a lot of the cars, old cars that were being crushed and eventually going through the metal recycling, they realized that number of them would catch on fire, and they had little mini explosions, and it was all due to what they had in the car,
So the
whether
chemicals and the
gasoline was
gases that were
left,
trapped
and the
inside.
chemicals and the air conditions in the old cars had all of that
Wow.
as well.
Now, you see, that to me is really interesting, because you're highlighting something that I think we need to think more about, which is not simply consequences, but who has to be involved to make change. Because we've got manufacturers who are creating things that sectors really desperately need.
Right.
We've got supply chains that are filled with objects that potentially, when brought together or destroyed or recycled, have problems. You've got municipalities or states who are trying to stop dangerous chemicals being in the atmosphere and in the water table. You've got people. Who needs to be at the table to actually change the way we deal with all of this?
Amazingly enough, I like to point this out. We do have a body in Southern California called SCAQMD, South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the strongest and the most influential entity governing what can be sent to the atmosphere and not. And a lot of processors and manufacturers absolutely despise them. Years ago, they had a great idea. Anytime they want to pass a rule and regulation and so on, they put a big team together that is called the BAC team, Best Available Control Technology team. They interviewed a lot of companies like ours. Back then, there weren't very many. So we were, just not because of geographic, but because of a lot of the technology we have in house, I sat at that board.
Okay.
So inviting people that are able to provide you with solutions, it may perhaps delay getting a kickoff on building a brand new facility, because you have to go through all the process of getting your permits and having that looked at. People like us that come up with solutions should also be invited to the table.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do quite often, work with different environmental agencies around the country to let them know, well, something you want to enforce is not available at all yet, but we can work towards it.
Right.
Something, so people, scientists and companies that are into the providing solutions should always be invited. And I think that's a key element, but often overlooked.
Yeah. I mean, one of the elements that's also overlooked is the financing of new technologies and the deployment. There's obviously a challenge if those technologies aren't available yet. But what's it going to take to make those solutions available and affordable? Because, what do you think the market needs? We've got a little bit of regulation, but is it about bringing costs down? Is it about incentives? What do you think we actually need to see to really get scale on how we deal with PFAs and PFOs?
Well, incentives always help. Years ago, there was a program put in place in US, and a lot of states still have it available. We're the only company in the country really provide that because it took a lot of know-how. We were able to get up to 50% of the project incentivized.
That's brilliant.
Because it was great. So there are incentives available. As technology develops, the equipment and the cost, that R&D cost goes away. So equipment have become much more affordable than people like to think, because we've done so many. The first round of equipment like ours 30 years ago were probably more expensive than what we could produce it for now.
Yeah, you learn by doing and you get better at it.
That's right. You get better at it as well.
This brings me back to the idea of the size of the market. What do you think the market size is for addressing PFAs? Because if there is a large market for this, then you're going to get investment in it. But if it's broken out into requirements that individual manufacturers might have to implement or not, you're not going to get the kind of scale that's going to attract large-scale capital.
I think this market would eventually be billions and billions of dollars of market that would open up a lot of possibilities. It is something that we have to deal with, and it is something that we're going to have to address as time goes on. Our type of equipment should be installed at every single facility that comes across this product, whether they're using it, whether they're producing it, whether they're having anything to do with it, because it should not go out to the atmosphere. And I believe EPA they had a major group put together from about 2022, 24 that were working and gathering information as to the presence of it and the how to and what do we come up with. And I believe this will eventually, if not already, I know in our area in Texas and a number of other areas, it is being addressed, and anyone that comes in contact with this product in terms of production and what they need to do has to have our type of equipment in there.
Right. You mentioned earlier the similarities to concerns about climate change. You also mentioned that you built your first technology sort of 30 years ago. Why has it taken us so long to get a mainstream conversation about PFAS? And to be blunt, it's not that mainstream. I know about it because, I work on environmental things, but I don't know a huge amount about it. And it's not something that comes up in everyday conversation about manufacturing. But it's clearly really important. So why hasn't the conversation changed faster?
I don't want to bring the politics behind it in the picture, because we can always use that as a scapegoat, say the politics puts things at a pace where they like to see it. I know in our country, in US, administrations look at things differently at times, some more aggressive with respect to the issues at hand and environmental issues, and some administration not as much. If that continues, if we lose 4 years, 4 years is a long time to lose. And so that's that. But at the same time, let me just say, I believe at one point in time, the chemical industry as a whole, American Chemistry Council was looking at it, and this was a topic that came up a long time ago. They said that they just don't know how else and what to produce. It's going to take years in order for them to even be able to look at this and produce something different.
So because it was hard, they decided not to?
Yes, it was very hard. It wasn't a one man's decision. It was like, we don't know what else to produce in order to replace this with, to have the same type of
precision and
longevity and precision and stability they needed to have.
But if they were having that conversation a long time ago, surely there should have been some kind of body set up to do the research.
I have been looking at PFAS for about 10 years.
Right.
And the equipment that we're putting out right now is probably 2 years into production. But I've had my eye on this, and what do we do with this? We had to go through a lot of learning ourselves to make sure the product and the components, that everything works, because we never ever wanted to make a guinea pig out of anyone.
No, and that does make sense. I suppose the question that begs, because it sounds like it's complex enough even within the borders of the US, are there
Right.
no global standards for how one should treat PFAS?
I believe we lack global standards as a whole.
Okay.
We work with all different types of
Yeah.
industries, and it's not just one industry, and a lot of different types of products. At times, our standards from one state to the other is different.
Right. That makes it hard.
It makes it hard. And then, unless something becomes a major global issue, then people begin to come together and look at things globally. But I think at a global scale, um, who do you put do
Who
you
do you put in
place
charge?
as the yes in charge?
Yeah.
Who do you listen to? Then naturally, scientists on their own, a lot of times they feel like they should be what they're right versus another person. So you've got a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
But a body, a team of people that would be looking at this. That's why we've been writing about it. We've been bringing it up in social media and just paying attention to it and letting
Yeah.
people know that you can't ignore it,
Well, I think the reason
because it really is terrible.
yeah.
And it is in the water system. Not everyone uses filtered water. So if it is in the water system and our water tables, people are drinking it. Now they're talking even about the fish and some of the fish that are getting into the food chain.
This is why I'm interested about global standards, just because if you have an agreement about what is an unacceptable safety level, then at
Right,
least everybody has a shared goal to work towards in terms of
right,
research. And it just feels very fragmented. And yet, the sorts of things you're talking about in terms of manufacturing it, perhaps in terms of, I suppose, the cost to utilities if you're going to do it at the downstream end, it's all very fragmented and very difficult to deal with. So I can see why there hasn't been a sort of integrated approach to it all. But if that information is clear and the data is there about the levels of chemicals in the water table and the impact it can have on people, that manufacturing, those utilities, those defense companies, they'll operate all over the world. So it's not just a US thing, it'll be everywhere.
yes, it will be everywhere. It's becoming an issue that is being addressed. At least it is being looked at. I have to say that. There is something called an SDS sheet, safety data sheets. If there is ever a plant that is using anything with fluorinated material as a part of their overall permit application, that material has to be disclosed. So that's
Right.
the first red flag.
Disclosure is always the
So
first step.
disclosure is good. Once that is disclosed, then the agencies are asking, well, how are you treating this material once it gets through your process? There are a lot of steps that are being looked at, and I do know that a lot of the agencies around the country in US are looking at that very carefully. That is part of our requirement to make sure any permit that is filed, you have all the chemicals disclosed.
Yeah.
So it's important to have that. And it's the same way in a lot of other European countries. Global addressing of everything that we're sending out to our atmosphere
Yeah.
is being addressed somewhat uniformly, I have to say. I'm very optimistic. I've seen what has happened in China over the last
Yeah.
decade.
It's been
We do
phenomenal.
have we do have an office there,
Okay.
and we do all the products in China for China, because I always say we have no boundaries in our air. So no matter what you want to do, you'll eventually breathe it no matter where it's produced. China is scaling up to make sure they treat this. I believe India is beginning to look into two major countries that produce a lot, and they're beginning to look at various industries and bring it all to almost the same level of control.
Well, that,
Europe has always been very good about it,
okay.
and they do follow the standards, rules, regulations, standards that we also have in USA.
Right.
So there is a global body that is looking at it.
What's potentially going to be really interesting is looking at the drivers for disclosure under the Paris Agreement or the Global Biodiversity Agreement, because Global Biodiversity Framework, because if you're actually having to disclose on things that have an impact on biodiversity and nature, because industry is dependent on that, then you're going to have a significant economic driver for action, which could be really transformational.
That is very true. And the disclosure is key, as you mentioned. As I said, I'm an optimist that some of the things that were not even being addressed 20 years ago when we were in global meetings now is being addressed. Our type of equipment is being recognized. So there is a major shift, as well as a lot of potential. But some of these issues I do appreciate, and thank you for bringing the subject matter up for discussion and for awareness. The more people understand that it exists, the better it would be for our community and environment, for everybody.
It's one of the things that we really believe in, the fact that you have to be able to talk about things and understand what it means before you can do anything about changing its impacts. I think
that's very true.
One thing I would love to know, because one thing we love to do is actually break down myths. What do you think the biggest misconception about PFAS is?
One is many people don't even know what it is.
Right.
I mean, people don't really understand what it is. Knowing what you need to treat is half of the solution. It should not be just the chemical producers and chemical companies that should know what PFAS is.
Or just, in manufacturing, or just consumers. What's the one thing you would want them all to know? Is it that prevention is cheaper?
I would love for them to know prevention is always cheaper, as a rule of thumb. Getting to know what it is that we're trying to treat and how are we going to go about it is another. But knowing and being aware of everything in our environment.
Yeah.
And when I say our environment is everything we breathe, everything we eat, everything we touch and we come in contact with. If you search enough, you're able to find enough information about it. And that's my motto. There has to always be a solution for things.
Yeah.
We are driven by coming up with solutions, but being mindful of the solution not harming something else.
That's a really important point, and I think it also speaks to this idea that awareness and understanding of what's going on around us, it means you can make choices. You don't have to agree with each other's choices, but at least be mindful of the choice you're making. So it's that you're doing it in full awareness that it's your decision, rather than just going along with something because you decided not to think about it.
Absolutely. And just for this one, if I may, this last company that we are working with, once we really provided the solution and the know-how, they were shocked that this can really be done, and it wasn't addressed originally from the management side a long time ago. So looking for it is definitely a great area to invest in, because it has to do a lot with how healthy our next generation is going to be to have to live with this.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you, Anoosheh, for joining us today. To our listeners, I hope you found the episode useful and interesting. Share it with someone who cares about safe water and resilient communities. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us next time on Shake and Not Burn.